Yo, 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 welcome to the podcast. Oh, yeah, we're podcasting. Yeah, we're podcasting. I know this isn't really a podcast. It's more like a video, but I don't care. I'm still gonna call it a podcast because I'm old as fuck. And I'm not really that old. I'm only 31, but whatever. Anyway, welcome to the podcast. I am gonna play a little bit of Stellaris, and I'm also gonna listen to my boy Paul Christopher from the Prophecy Club. Yes, today we're gonna listen to some Paul Christopher on the Prophecy Club. This is fair use because we are trying to spread the word of God. So, Prophecy Club, don't get on my shit. Anyway, yeah, we're going to listen to some Paul Christopher. He's going to be talking about how aliens are really fallen angelic beings. And then we're also going to be playing the part of fallen angelic beings. And I do this all in good fun. All in good fun. I love crazy people on YouTube. And therefore, I like to listen to the crazy shit. So we're going to listen to some craziness. Anyway, yep, we're gonna listen to some crazy shit while I'm playing some of this game, Stellaris. It's a game of it's master strategy. I don't know what the fuck they call it. It's a very strategic game, but not in the sense of Civ, where you gotta, do all that good shit. This is a little bit more, heady than Civ. Paradox Studios, they do a good job with strategy games. They're badass, and yeah. So we're gonna do that, and we're gonna put this crazy Prophecy Club shit on. So y'all be good. Sit back, relax, watch me play this shit, listen to some crazy people talking. And, yeah, be good.
Help me welcome Paul Christopher.
There are three primary movements involved in a satanic strategy with the sole purpose of implementing a divine plan to bring about a one world order and a new world religion, simultaneously ushering in the emergence of an Aquarian Age Christ. Now, the first of these primary movements is the occult, or the practice of the occult sciences. And the occult has been with us since God created Adam and Eve. Since Lucifer and 1/3 of God's angels were cast out of heaven. And God forbids us to dabble in the occult in Deuteronomy 18, because this leads to this doorway into the demonic realm. Now, the second primary movement involved in this satanic strategy is the New Age movement. And we're going to see tonight that the New Age movement began in the mid to late 1800s with the rise of spiritualism and theosophy. The third primary movement involved in this satanic strategy is the UFO phenomenon. And it seemed to explode in the late 1940s, 1950s.
Oh, man, come on.
Now, since we have entered the 21st century, these three primary movements have since merged to form an occult trinity of their own. And we are going to see tonight what they are trying to implement. Now, this following list I'm going to read involves all these strategies: UFOs, UFO contacts, alien abductions, animal mutilations, apparitions of the Virgin Mary, psychic phenomena,
Damn, man.
The supernatural, religion, the occult, numerology, astrology, science, politics, the United States government and military,
oh, man, come on.
television, and certain key individuals, along with the general public, are collectively instrumental in fueling this sinister plan. Now, the New Testament of Scripture enlightens us to this otherworldly dimension. And it says in Ephesians, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Now, if we look at these verses a little more closely, we come across this phrase, the wiles of the devil. Now, when I looked up the word wiles in the dictionary, it means sly tricks or deceit, a stratagem, a satanic strategy. And down here, let's see what we're up against. Against the rulers of the darkness of this world. The rulers of this world. Against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now just take the phrase high places and put that in the back of your mind, because we're going to see how these high places come into play here within the UFO phenomenon. And then we read in Matthew chapter 24. "Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not." Now, if we look at these couple of verses a little more closely, we see false Christs. And we will see tonight how there are two false Christs involved in the New Age movement, involved in the UFO phenomenon. "Shall show great signs and wonders." There are great signs and wonders going on right now at an alarming rate. We have all sorts of so-called miracles, apparitions of Mary, bleeding statues, UFOs. There's all sorts of paranormal phenomena taking place throughout the world. Now, if we go down here, "Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth." Well, we're going to see just how the desert comes into play within the UFO phenomenon. "Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not." Maybe we'll have some insight into these secret chambers, what they actually are or where they are. Now, since the early 1950s, a period in history when the UFO phenomenon exploded into worldwide events. There were sightings throughout the globe. There were contacts even being claimed. And some of these photos were circulating back then. Some are deemed a hoax. Some are unexplainable. But these photos did circulate. They put into our minds that there was extraterrestrial visitors. Now, also during this period of the 1950s, an entity named Ashtar, who claims to be from outer space, began deliberately contacting certain individuals by means of channeling, telepathy, trance mediums, and even Ouija boards. And this entity named Ashtar was offering salvation and an assortment of other amazing things to humankind in the 1950s. Now, Ashtar claims to be orbiting the Earth in a huge spaceship. He ranks himself Commander-in-Chief of the Free Federation of Planets. Sounds like something out of a Star Trek movie. Ashtar has recently written a book, channeled through a New York businessman, titled The New World Order, that focuses on astounding predictions regarding the future of humanity. Now let's look at some Old Testament Bible verses. Judges in particular, we'll start. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. Now down here in Judges again. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam and Ashtaroth, and the gods of Syria, the gods of Zidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the children of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the Lord and served not him. Ashtaroth, and you can see here there were a lot of other gods here, and also in Samuel. Put away the strange gods and Ashtaroth from among you. And the children of Israel did put away Balaam and Ashtaroth and served the Lord only. Now, the similarity in the spelling of these two names, Ashtar and Ashtaroth, in my opinion, is not a coincidence. I believe we're dealing with the same entity. So now we have this Ashtar, or Ashtaroth, an Old Testament false deity who is linked to today's UFO phenomenon. Now, we saw in Matthew 24, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Well, in the 1950s, certain contactees claimed that they were in contact with some of these extraterrestrials, so-called extraterrestrials. And in 1952, a contactee named George Van Tassel, who died in 1978, claimed that he received telepathic messages from more than 20 of these so-called extraterrestrials, including Ashtar, in the Mojave Desert in California. Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Subsequently, telepathic contact with the Ashtar Command occurred regularly in the years to follow. Now, the Ashtar Command boasts many great fleets of spaceships occupied by thousands of well-organized ranks of extraterrestrials. And one of its missions includes the evacuation of selected human souls during cataclysmic events that are soon to occur on Earth. Sounds like a rapture scenario. Now, the Ashtar Command has associates. 4 in particular. And 2 of the associates, or some of the extraterrestrials that are supposedly ranked higher, are Soltec and Munka. And these pictures are circulating the internet or New Age bookstores. 2 other associates involved with the Ashtar Command, or Ashtaroth, are Corton and Athena. Now, that's an interesting name. Athena has been recognized as the ancient Greek goddess. The gods of the Old Testament. Now, Athena claims to be a commander of the starship of Sananda. Okay, well, who is Sananda? Sananda claims to be one of the highest ranked extraterrestrials and is often referred to as the beloved commander-in-chief of the Ashtar Command. However, Sananda's main claim to fame is that he claims to be the historical Jesus Christ. He's also recognized as the Master Jesus. And we're going to see how these masters fit into this UFO scenario. But as you can see, they've taken an historical picture of Jesus Christ that has probably been in thousands of churches throughout the world, and they've attached this name Sananda. So they believe that the historical Jesus Christ is an extraterrestrial. Now, at this present time, and at an alarming rate, Sananda, Ashtaroth, members of the Ashtar Command, and legions of other so-called extraterrestrials are channeling messages regularly through thousands of light workers and other human individuals or groups of individuals who today are devoted to New Age ideologies and UFO organizations. Now, I mentioned the word light workers. If you go to any New Age bookstore, read any New Age book, you'll see this term often. Light workers are New Age disciples devoted to the undertaking of this spiritual assignment on earth, known as the divine plan, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This divine plan is a spiritual reorganization of the planet. And we're going to see how they're attempting to do this. Now let's go back to the 1950s once again. And as I said before, the 1950s was a very important decade. UFO sightings were occurring at an alarming rate. Thousands, millions of people around the globe witnessed a variety of objects in the skies. This object, this picture here was taken over Texas. It's known as the Lubbock Lights. It's a famous UFO picture. This was taken in Oregon, Salem, Oregon. And these pictures have been circulating for years, instilling in our minds that maybe we are being visited by so-called extraterrestrials. Now, I mentioned the contactee, George Van Tassel, and his contacts with Ashtar and the Ashtar Command in the Mojave Desert in California. Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Well, let me define the word contactee. A contactee is a person who claims to have recurring physical and telepathic contact of a friendly nature with so-called extraterrestrials, as opposed to an abductee. I'm sure we're familiar with the term abductee. People who claim they are taken against their will. Well, these contactees, or these contacts in the 50s and 60s, were of a friendly nature. Now, during the 50s, there were other contactees who stepped forward, claiming contact with these supposed extraterrestrials in the Mojave Desert. And one of the most influential contactees was named George Adamski, who died in 1965. Now, Adamski was publicly acknowledged as the first contactee. He became a celebrity. He toured the world. He purportedly met a being named Orthon, who supposedly stepped out of a spaceship in the Mojave Desert in California. Now, if we look at this name Orthon, O-R-T-H-O-N, we see a resemblance to the ancient Viking or Norse god Thor, Thor, O-R-T-H, the false gods of the Old Testament. Now, Orthon claimed that he was from the planet Venus, and he communicated to Adamski a message of peace and love. But Adamski described Orthon's physical characteristics as bearing a striking resemblance to religious paintings of Jesus Christ. Now, interestingly, if we look at the name Adamski, we see a remarkable resemblance to the name Adam, who, as we know, was the first man created by God. Adamski was the first recognized contactee. Now, curiously, in 1963, 2 years before he passed away, Adamski supposedly had a secret meeting at the Vatican in Rome with Pope John the 23rd. Now, that's very interesting. A man claiming contact with so-called extraterrestrials has a meeting at the Vatican. What could they have been discussing? Maybe they were discussing some cataclysmic future event. Anyway, 2 years later, he passed away in 1965, and his daughter founded the George Adamski Foundation in Vista, California. And it claims members worldwide, thousands of members. They also claim that they are still receiving these messages from these various outer space entities. Now, I'd like to mention George Van Tassel again, who was one of these contactees, contacts in the Mojave Desert. Well, he founded an organization called the Ministry of Universal Wisdom. And he began these regular Saturday night spacecraft conventions in the Mojave Desert in California. And at these meetings, there were channeling sessions and lectures from other contactees, including George Adamski. He was one of them. Another interesting contactee who also lectured and had channeling sessions was Gabriel Green. We're going to talk about Gabriel Green in just a minute. But the point I want to make here is that we had large groups of people at these conventions. In fact, they were held at a place called Giant Rock. This was the rock, and it was in the Mojave Desert, and this is supposedly a UFO sighting, but nobody seems to be looking at it. But it was estimated sometimes as many as 10,000 people participated or went to these conventions from the 1950s to the 70s, so for 20 some odd years. And they were anticipating these channeled intergalactic gospel messages of these various extraterrestrials through these certain contactees who were making these claims. Now, George Van Tassel also channeled messages from another entity named Solganda, which is very similar to Sananda. It may be the same entity. And this entity instructed him to build a device inside a 4-story high dome structure known as the Integratron. Now, the Integratron was a machine, and it was supposed to rejuvenate the elderly and stop the aging process of our youth. Now, that sort of sounds like everlasting life to me. So we channeled these instructions from Solganda to build this thing out in the desert. And as you can see, he did. But he didn't finish it. He died. But he spent almost $250,000 on this project. And it just sits out there in the desert. Now, I mentioned the contactee Gabriel Green, who also was involved in these spacecraft conventions in the Mojave Desert in the 50s. And he lectured there and he channeled messages. But Green claims that since the 1950s, he is in contact both physically and telepathically with Ashtaroth, and the Ashtar Command, and another group of extraterrestrials known as the Space Masters of the Great White Brotherhood, who instructed him to organize a Flying Saucers Club. And he did. It was called AFSCA, A-F-S-C-A. It stood for Amalgamated Flying Saucer Clubs of America, and it quickly became popular, boasting thousands of members in more than 24 countries. But the clincher was that these supposed extraterrestrials asked Green to run for President of the United States in 1960. He eventually withdrew in support of John F. Kennedy. But 2 years later, in 1962, he ran for U.S. Senate in California and received almost 250,000 votes. Well, who was this guy? 10 years later, in 1972, he again ran for President of the United States under the Universal Party. And the Universal Party offered the American people solutions to national and international problems proposed by extraterrestrial beings through outer space contact. Now, interestingly, these supposed extraterrestrials influenced Green in supporting the economics of a cashless society, a system supposedly in use on other planets. And of course, today, as we witness this rapid growth of a one-world economy and this institution of a new world order, this cashless society is racing towards reality. Now, if all this was going on with this character back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it's amazing that, well, we have to think about the leaders that are involved in politics now. Who's influencing them? Okay. In 1984, Gabriel Green channeled a specific message from Ashtar regarding the imminent return of the Aquarian Age Christ. And Ashtar informed Green that the second coming of the Christ will occur when a spaceship makes its first public landing. The Christ will, of course, be on board. Interesting. Now, I've talked a lot about channeling. And channeling is one method of contact with these so-called extraterrestrials. It's going on at an alarming rate today. But to fully understand what channeling is, we have to define the three types of channeling. And the first type of channeling is called full body channeling. And it occurs when the soul of the human individual leaves his or her body, and this unseen entity or supposed extraterrestrial literally takes over and possesses. It incarnates the individual's body, utilizing it as its own. Now, this is very similar to demonic possession. Now, in New Age circles or UFO literature, these entities are often referred to as walk-ins or starseeds. These are important terms to remember because once you see those terms, you'll know exactly what they are. These are full-body channelers or demonically possessed people. And supposedly there are a lot of them out there right now. And they're involved in organizations. The second type of channeling is called conscious channeling. And it occurs when these unseen entities or supposed extraterrestrials joined the human in his or her body. The human is conscious of this joining and provides a vehicle for this entity to work through. Now, in New Age terminology, this is often referred to as twin souls. So if you see the word twin soul, you know these are conscious channelers. And oftentimes, if you read a manuscript or a book by a channeler, he or she will often mention, I have two souls. I'm a twin soul. The third type of channeling is called trance channeling. And it occurs when a human individual enters into a trance-like state. So they're not conscious of this entity coming in and utilizing this person's body and speaking directly through it. Now, this is very similar to what happens when an apparition of the Virgin Mary occurs. The visionary enters into a trance-like state. And it's usually only that person or a group of people that can see the Virgin or the supposed apparition. Oftentimes, their bodies contort. Their eyes roll back in their heads. It's a really frightening thing to see these people. Now, when trance channeling is taking place, there's usually another individual there who's transcribing or writing these messages down, because the trance channeler is unconscious to what's going on. And as a result of all these channelings, numerous books are written and published. And in fact, if you walk into a New Age bookstore, 80 to 90% of the material in there is channeled. And I mentioned Ashtar's book at the beginning, The New World Order. That's a channeled manuscript. Okay. So we can see that channeling is strikingly similar to demonic possession, whereby a possessed person succumbs to this unseen entity or demon's power. And in so doing, their entire being or will are taken over by that entity, by that demon. Now, I often wonder how many thousands of people are actually becoming possessed or are possessed by demonic entities today. Now, interesting, channeling dates back to the ancient Egyptians and Greeks. This is a channeler out of Australia who channels this master. I'm going to talk about these masters in a minute. But channeling is nothing new. It goes back to the ancient times, the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Chinese, the Babylonians, who channeled communications from these various gods or disembodied spirits. The gods of the Old Testament. That's how they communicated with them. Now, in all likelihood, these same false deities out of Scripture are disguising themselves as extraterrestrials, because we live in a technological society. Now, channeling is not the only method to communicate with these supposed beings. Another popular method is called automatic writing. And automatic writing is achieved while an individual is in a trance-like state, similar to trance channeling. But this time the person is holding a pen or pencil in a normal fashion. The ability to write is then imparted to the recipient by some invisible intelligence. Now, automatic writing dates back to the 19th century in Europe, when the planchette, an improved version of the Ouija board, had a pencil attached to the Ouija pointer. So these direct transcriptions of these spiritual messages could be written down onto a piece of paper. Eventually, the planchette was discarded, and this direct communication took place by direct means. They didn't need the Ouija board. They just sat there with a pencil in their hand and started writing. Now today, it's changed once again. Since we have technological achievements and we now have computers, a person sits at the keyboard, and just starts typing away in a trance. Now I mentioned the Ouija board, and that's another contemporary method used to communicate with these supposed extraterrestrials. And I was amazed when I ventured into a New Age bookstore, and there's plenty of them out there. They're in every major city throughout the world. And I saw a Ouija board at the back table, but it wasn't called a Ouija board. You know what it's called now? An angel board. Now, the Ouija dates back 500 years before Christ. It was an old instrument used by the Chinese to supposedly communicate with their dearly departed. Similar instruments were used by the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, who attempted to obtain these revelations from the spirit world. That's exactly what's going on today. Only these entities are disguising themselves as extraterrestrials, or spirit guides, or masters. We're going to see how these masters come into play. So, as Christians, we can see the Ouija board and these similar methods it opens this doorway. This is very dangerous. It opens this doorway into the realm of the demonic. And all these occult meditations that I've mentioned are highly dangerous. Don't ever get involved in any of these things, because they can lead to possession and oppression. In fact, once these entities latch onto an individual, they torment them mentally and physically for years, sometimes till they die. And the only way to rid yourself of this occult meditation and from these demonic entities is through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That's the only way. So if you know anybody involved in this, please witness to them, because they are in danger. Now, I mentioned earlier this explosion of the UFO phenomenon in the 1950s. And there were sightings, there were photographs. Now, while this was going on, there was also a revival in the occult sciences. People were dabbling in the occult. And occultists believe that they are able to use or control these powers, these supernatural powers that are hidden from them. They usually operate secretly and often disguise these subversive activities. Hence we have secret occult societies. Hidden secret ciphers and mystical occult symbols abound in their various manuscripts and texts. How often have you opened an occult book or an occult-type book and seen one of these symbols? You have no idea what it means. They use these symbols to communicate magic, magical practices. Inside these symbols are hidden magical terms. Another way they communicated was through ciphers or codes. And one code I've discovered within the UFO phenomenon is the Cipher 6 code. And it's based on the number 11, which is considered by occultists or magicians to be a great magical number. And what they've done is they've taken the alphabet, and they've taken each letter of the alphabet and put it, and each letter is made into a number. They start with A equals 1. Then they count down 11 letters and come to L equals 2. They keep going down the whole alphabet till it's numbered. And they use this to to transmit these messages through names, through different meanings of words. So each and these numbers and letters mean something totally different. So that's how they can communicate. And we need to be aware that these things are involved today. That's involved in this satanic strategy. So they can network, they can communicate, so nobody finds out what they're doing. Now, I mentioned magic, and the practice of magic is essential. When they're involved in these rituals or ceremonies, they incorporate a secret satanic theology, and they communicate with these supernatural beings. In fact, they employ a branch of operative magic called theurgy, which involves the practice of these certain magical rites that evoke these supernatural beings and direct them to earth. Now, we've all heard of these secret occult societies, such as the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Rosicrucians, Satanists, and even modern-day psychics, channelers, and trance mediums, who summon these supernatural beings are attempting to use and control their powers. But in actuality, the powers of these supernatural beings end up controlling them. Now, by dabbling in the occult during this time, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, these decades, they've evoked these supernatural entities, these gods of the Old Testament, these beloved space brothers from outer space, these demonic beings. So, now as a direct result of this occult revival, and also this contact with these supposed ETs, over the past 50 years, a new religious movement has emerged, known as the New Age movement. And an integral part of this New Age movement is the undertaking of this spiritual assignment, known as the divine plan. This spiritual reorganization of the planet. That's what they're attempting to do. Now, as we can see, in all likelihood, this extraterrestrial appearance is a costume. It's a smokescreen. But thousands of people are being deceived. Now, as Christians, we can recognize this smokescreen because the Bible tells us, beware of the wiles of the devil. Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. And his demons can be ministers of righteousness. We know that. But a lot of people are being deceived. They're being deceived because they've been conditioned to think that these craft and these entities are benevolent or extraterrestrial. And in fact, over the years, through the contacts, they claim they will save the planet when these cataclysmic changes will come upon the earth. Many feel they will be rescued and taken to another planet. But lately, they appear to be waiting for something, for some moment in time. Time for what? It's very possible that this timetable may indeed coincide with the emergence of the Antichrist. We're going to see how that comes into play. Now, another outer space being involved with Ashtar and the Ashtar Command, who channels messages regularly through numerous individuals, is Kudhumi. He's often called the world teacher. He's often recognized as one of the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood. Now, earlier I spoke about Gabriel Green and his contacts with the space masters of the Great White Brotherhood. These are the same entities. And there's a group of them. Now, Kuthumi, along with other ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, in cooperation with Ashtar and the Ashtar Command and various other extraterrestrials, they are the initiators of this divine plan, this spiritual reorganization of the planet and its mission that is being carried out by these New Age disciples today. Now, the origin of these ascended masters and their connection with present-day New Age teachings goes back more than 100 years. And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that the New Age movement actually was started because of events that took place in the mid to late 1800s. And at this time, 3 women arose: Helena Blavatsky, Annie Besant, Alice Bailey. They played the part of an occult female trinity. And they claimed to be in contact both physically and telepathically with these ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, who claimed residence on the planet Venus, like Adamski's extraterrestrial friend Orthon also claimed residence on Venus. There were higher masters, and they were called the Lords of the Flame. A group of lower masters, known as the Lords of the Seven Rays, was in direct contact with these 3 women. Now, the revelations received by Blavatsky, Besant, and Bailey have since guided the course of today's New Age movement. These 3 women were so influential on this entire New Age movement. Events that were going back to the late 1800s. Now, Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society in 1875 in New York as a direct result of these communications from Master Kuthumi. In fact, she claimed that in 1868 she met Kuthumi face to face. 27 years later, in 1895, Alice Bailey, at the age of 15, claims she met Kuthumi face to face and believed she was in the presence of the historical Jesus Christ, who informed her that she would be involved in an important mission. And indeed, she was involved in an important mission because she eventually channeled 19 books from these ascended masters, most of which came through Jwal Khul. And these pictures are circulating the internet. They've even taken Melchizedek out of the Old Testament and elevated him to ascended master. But in 1919, she claimed that Jwal Khul communicated to her through channeling, and he dictated a book called The Externalization of the Hierarchy, which reveals the plan, the divine plan. The divine plan revealed startling New Age concepts for the development of a one-world economy and a one-world religion, the cornerstone of today's emerging New World Order. This is back in the early 1900s. Now, leaders of the New Age movement throughout the world revere this plan, this divine plan. And its revelations have fueled this present mission that is being carried out to promote this New World Order. Now, throughout the years, these ascended masters have been referred to by an assortment of titles, such as Spiritual Hierarchy of Ascended Masters is one of their titles. Illumined Ones, which strikingly is similar to the Illuminati. Great White Brotherhood, they're often called. Great White Lodge. Tibetan Masters. That's interesting. Tibetan. Well, actually, their earthly residence is supposedly in the Himalayas, near Tibet. Spiritual wickedness in high places. They're also often called the masters of wisdom. Remember that term. The masters of wisdom. Now, interestingly, some occultists affirm that these ascended masters are, in fact, spiritual, godlike human beings who possess great magical skills and powers. They supposedly have the ability to control these forces in the spiritual realm. It is claimed that they can prolong their lives for centuries. One who makes that claim is Saint Germain, or Master Ricosi. They can prolong their lives for centuries. That sounds similar to a vampire. And when they prolong their lives for centuries, they are supposedly forever guiding humanity's destiny by influencing key people on Earth. And that's what they're doing. Alice Bailey is a prime example. Now, in 1948, 1 year prior to her death, Alice Bailey channeled another manuscript, titled The Reappearance of the Christ. The Reappearance. Which revealed that the time for the Christ to appear was indeed approaching. This is 1948. The UFO phenomenon was beginning to unravel here. Now, the channel literature of Alice Bailey had a significant influence on another central figure involved with the New Age movement, Benjamin Creme. Now, back in the 1950s, and again, I bring up the fact that this UFO phenomenon was exploding at this time, during this decade. Well, Benjamin Creme read George Adamski's book, Flying Saucers Have Landed. Remember George Adamski, first contactee, publicly recognized contactee. And Creme was intrigued with Adamski's claims of this contact with these so-called extraterrestrials. Soon after he read Adamski's book, Creme joined George King's Aetherius Society, a London-based flying saucer contactee organization.
Come on.
Now, King was an occultist, but he claimed to be in contact with the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, who he believed were a group of extraterrestrial beings. In fact, he was in contact through channeling with Master Jesus, one of these ascended masters, or Sananda, who he believed was the historical Jesus Christ. And in 1958, he received a prophetic message regarding the emergence of a great avatar, a cosmic master with great magical powers who will arrive on the earth in a spaceship. Now, during Benjamin Creme's stay with George King's Aetherius Society, he also began receiving these messages, these channeled transmissions from the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood. He eventually left the Aetherius Society, and the ascended masters informed him of the reappearance of their leader. The reappearance of their leader, Lord Maitreya. Maitreya informed Creme that he could be a principal factor in his quote-unquote second coming, if he so desired. And he did desire. Soon after, Maitreya channeled messages again to Creme, informing him that his manifestation and reappearance to the modern world was soon. he told Krem to publish this news, and Krem did. He continues to publish this news. In 1977, these channeled messages from Maitreya to Krem revealed that his manifestation, Maitreya's manifestation, was complete. So he was a spirit entity, and he supposedly manifested into human form. He claims that he descended from this mystical Tibetan kingdom named Shambhala, or Shambhala, which is located somewhere in the Himalaya mountains, the supposed residence of these ascended masters on Earth, when they're on Earth. When he descended from Shambhala, he resided in London, England, and he claims to reside there today. Now, after this manifestation was complete, he instructed Krem to proclaim this. Krem lectured throughout Europe and North America, proclaiming that Maitreya was indeed manifested on the earth. Now, not long afterwards, in April 1982, a newspaper ad appeared declaring that Christ is now here. And this circulated through almost every major newspaper in the world. This declaration intended to inform humanity that the Christ would appear within the next 2 months. Evidently, however, this spectacular appearance never occurred. Now, if we read under here, who is the Christ, we can gain insight into what is going on here. And I'll read it to you. Throughout history, humanity's evolution has been guided by a group of enlightened men, the masters of wisdom, ascended masters. They have remained largely in the remote desert and mountain places. Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Spiritual wickedness in high places. The Bible warns us. The Bible warns us of this deception, that these false Christs will arise. Now, interestingly, Maitreya still claims that he's going to reveal himself to humanity as the Christ by appearing on national television, where he can simultaneously commute this message telepathically to all people. Now, if anybody's familiar with the Art Bell radio show, which I happened to be a guest on not too long ago, and I was able to reveal a lot of this information to the general public, but Benjamin Krem was on the Art Bell radio show not too long ago. And he announced that there is indeed a major network ready to air Maitreya's Day of Declaration. That is the day he will announce that he is the Christ. Krem also proclaimed that in 1984, Master Jesus manifested himself on the earth and is currently residing in Rome. And like Maitreya, he's waiting for this right moment in time to emerge or publicly reveal himself. And once he emerges, he will attempt to unite the religions of the Eastern and Western hemispheres into a one unified religion. Now, at this point, I'd like to clarify this Master Jesus and Lord Maitreya. They're actually two entities, two separate entities. And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation the false Christ, that there would be two false Christs. Now, what these people or this New Age movement believes is that Maitreya manifested himself on the earth 2,000 years ago. That's why I keep saying reappearance. And that the historical Jesus Christ body was merely a vehicle for the Lord Maitreya's spirit. They claim that through a process called spiritual overshadowing, Maitreya's consciousness was able to guide the actions and teachings of the historical Jesus Christ. That's what they believe. In fact, other religions believe that Maitreya's actions and teachings guided their Christs, their Messiahs. Now, according to Krem and these other New Age leaders, supposedly Maitreya's presence has had some impact in today's society, even though his spectacular appearance fell short. For example, in August of 1987, and that's a very important time period in history, a lot of events occurred in August of 1987. And at this time, Krem announced that there would be these significant changes in international political structures. So what has happened since August of 1987? Has there been any changes? Yes. We've seen, one, the breakup of the Soviet Union, or the supposed breakup of the Soviet Union. We've seen the Berlin Wall come down. The unification of Germany, that's a major political event. We've seen a formation of a democratic government in South Africa. We've also seen, frighteningly, the rise of the United Nations, who appear to be an organization that wants to rule the world. Now, remarkably, in 1988, Maitreya was supposedly photographed in Kenya. And these photos are circulating the internet. But if you look at these photos, and this is Maitreya here, standing here, and he's standing amongst 5,000 Muslim worshippers, but nobody seems to be noticing he's there. If he was standing in the midst of all these people, you'd think they would be grabbing his robe or at least looking at him. And here's another picture. And nobody seems to be noticing him. So it's very possible that these photos are faked, that they need a human figure to reinforce this belief system. They need some type of physical proof. They want to keep the myth alive, or the belief alive. Now, in recent years, supposedly Maitreya has visited numerous churches and organizations. And supposedly he has added healing properties to water sources, and people are becoming healed. He also claims that the apparitions of the Virgin Mary, that he's orchestrating these apparitions. All the reports of these bleeding statues, encounters with angelic beings, paranormal